Hi, Paul.
Hi, Bob. How are you today?
I can't complain. How are you, Paul? Oh, I
I'm
already
doing
asked
well.
you that.
I'm doing well. Do you want to do it again, or we're good?
No, I thought I think the spontaneity counts for something. People really value that.
I'm doing well. I like that. This is the Non-Zero podcast. You're Robert Wright,
True.
journalist, scholar, public intellectual. I'm Paul
Uh,
Bloom, professor
uh,
of psychology at University of Toronto.
uh-huh.
Do you want to correct my introduction of you?
I was just going to say you could have kept going a little longer with my list of things. I don't
I
think you didn't come near covering the waterfront, but it's fine. Say I
There's a
didn't
lot
hear the
more
word sage. Did you say sage? I don't recall hearing that.
guru, guru,
Mystic.
miss the inspiration. But
Yeah.
but come on. I bet a lot of people just stop with journalists. Yeah, I think but scholar, definitely a scholar. And maybe we'll discuss this later because I feel there's a little bit of frustration that your scholarly nature hasn't fully been recognized. And public intellectual.
It's so nice of you to say that, Paul.
I think it was a nice introduction, actually.
Yeah, no, that was nice. It got better as it went along. Um, so yeah, I mean, look, if you're going to handle the introduction, go ahead, guide us. What do we talk about?
Well, when we spoke last, we talked about the free speech issues, the campus issues revolving around the
Hmm.
Israel-Palestine thing. I have one addendum, and I think you probably have a response to my addendum, which is pretty soon, right after we spoke, I listened to this podcast, Pivot, with Scott Galloway and Kara Swisher, which podcast I enjoy. It says sort of tech updates and everything. And Scott has strong views about the issues we talked about. And he said something which I truly disagree with. But I'll just say what it is. He at one point was talking kind of generously about the campus protesters. Kids protest, they have a good cause, or they think they have a good cause, and a lot of the fervor on this is exaggerated. But then he talked about professors showing up at the protests and talking more generally. And he said, and in fact, I wrote this down. Administrators should draw a bright line between free speech and hate speech. And any professor who says something like from the river to the sea should be summarily fired. Then he went on and he drew an analogy of a professor showing up at a white power rally and harassing Black people. And I think he might be framing this in terms of professors harassing students. But what he said, and I think maybe what he believes, is that certain things professors will say could count as hate speech and are grounds for dismissal. And I respect the view, and a lot of people hold it. I entirely disagree, and I don't want to reiterate the conversation from a few weeks ago, but I think universities and societies work much better if professors can just say whatever they want to say. Their conduct in the classroom is different. Their conduct with regard to students is different. But if a professor wants to say that from the river to the sea, Palestine should be free, and write an article about it and go on CNN and talk about it, there should be no investigation, no punishment. If the professor wants to say that, like as Amy Wax did, that she's sympathetic to race realism, she should, no investigation, nothing. Then
Well, is there
I mean,
any limit? Is there anything that would qualify as such egregious hate speech that if you were a university president, you would say, look, I mean, even maybe as a
mhm.
practical matter, like this is obviously going to be so disruptive and divisive on campus to have a guy who said X, Y, and Z that we're going to get rid of him.
I think there are all sorts of limits to speech that
Mhm.
are codified in law. You can't blackmail people, you can't threaten people, you can't extort, you can't do insider trading. And from a professor's standpoint, there's all sorts of speech conduct in classrooms that should be strictly regulated, speech conduct with regard to students you're advising, and so on. But just pure speech, like just saying something in an interview, in a podcast, and no, I think there should be beyond the limits of the law, no limits. And it would be a brave stance for administrators to do because, a professor says all sorts of things, something coded right, coded left, that will really piss off people, cause a lot of fervor on campuses. And I think
Mhm.
respectable administrators say, hey, freedom of speech, academic freedom, full expression of ideas, have at it.
See, I can imagine if I were a college president, a professor saying something that I would just say, like, come on, you don't, belong at a college with our values. Let me, and I would say from the river to the sea is challenging because it means different things to different people.
Yeah.
And it is, and I think a lot of Jews do find it, well, triggering, not to minimize it. I mean, genuinely, they find it, you know, they flinch when they hear it or whatever.
I do.
Do you?
Yeah.
That's funny. Because you acknowledge that a lot of the people chanting it, well, first of all, half of them are just chanting it because everyone else is chanting it. But a number of the people who say it or chant it, you would acknowledge, don't mean the thing, they don't mean to link it to the connotation that makes you flinch, right?
I accept that. I think stuff like global intifada, there's just one solution, intifada revolution, and so those make me flinch too. Even though I recognize a lot of people are just chanting it because people chant things, and I'm sure there's quite a few Jews in the crowd chanting it as well. But yeah, they make me flinch.
That's understandable. I think in that case, it's almost clearer that they actually mean it in such a comprehensive sense that they're definitely not confining it to Jews. I mean, they're talking about a revolution, like a revolution of the oppressed everywhere, which, if you ask them to list the oppressed, would include a lot of people being oppressed by a lot of different kinds of people. But that said, Intifada, because of the second Intifada especially, has particularly traumatic connotations for especially Israeli Jews. I'm against
the flinch test.
You're against the flinch test.
I flinch, but that shouldn't bear on what people should be allowed to do. I know a lot of trans people flinch at certain statements that professors make about sex and gender. I know, certainly a lot of people flinch at what Amy Wax says. The flinch test is a poor test.
Yeah. Who may not agree with you, believe it or not, judging by something that I think recently happened, is free speech advocate Bari Weiss. Now, do you know why I say that?
No, because we get to Bari Weiss, but I actually thought Bari Weiss and you share a common cause, that you're both against this anti-Semitism law that made it through Congress.
That is one of the few things I can cite that we share. If she shares it, yes. But there's something else. I want to get to that because I wrote about it in the Non-Zero newsletter, and it is truly an atrocity, that bill, which passed overwhelmingly in the House and awaits action in the Senate. But there was this other thing. So on Twitter, there's this video that went around a couple of days ago of this guy kind of harassing this Muslim woman in a headscarf. And he's just all over her. He's just following her around. And he's like holding up his arms so that he can get his chest as close to her as possible. It's like 3 inches away. He's almost bumping her, just following her. She's trying to get away. She's like, leave me alone. Clearly a crazy person. He turns out to be Jonathan Udelman, who was, first of all, he's a postdoc at Princeton University's James Madison, I think it's Institute. It's one of the few right-wing institutes at Princeton. It's run by Robbie George, this conservative Catholic who I like, I've had on the podcast, but also this guy was on apparently the website of Bari Weiss U, also known as the University of Austin. That's this free speech mecca that she's, I guess, establishing, which you've definitely heard of, right? This newly started university, which doesn't, I guess, very much exist physically yet, but maybe has momentum. Anyway, he was on the website, I gather, as a faculty member, and if reports on Twitter to be trusted, they took his name off. Now, I guess you might. I mean, what would you do if you were Bari Weiss? Would you have disassociated? Would you have fired him?
I want to know more about it. I just saw this clip of the video out of context, which was exactly as you described. But yeah, I probably would have. I mean, again, you'd be very much in favor of free speech. That doesn't mean that everything you do that involves speech is acceptable. He was plainly harassing a woman.
Okay.
He was physically harassing her, a single person. It would be an absurd version of free speech defense to say, oh, you could do that. So maybe she started, maybe there was some sort of, you can't get the full context, but
I doubt she's a randomly selected Muslim. She must have said something he didn't approve of, but Yeah, he was clearly kind of crazy.
I have no problem with some sort of punishment or sanction for that sort of behavior.
Yeah.
I am Canadian in the end.
No, it shows. It shows. And I mean that in a nice way.
We're just more to say this, but I was telling I emailed you. I never read the comments, but two things. One thing is the comments on your Substack are excellent. There was a really engaged debate over Dennett and consciousness. I don't know if you read any of this, but really smart.
No,
people.
I did. They're good. The secret sauce here is the comments are usually confined to paid subscribers and non-zero newsletter. Very select and elite group.
People think that they pay to get access, but you pay, you get smarter. You put skin in the game. It just ups your game.
Oh, it's amazing.
But I also made the mistake of looking at the YouTube comments, which are
different kettle of fish. Yeah,
honestly, without exception, a pack of morons.
I wouldn't go that far. People have said nice things about me on YouTube, and that's a kind of IQ test, in my view.
Many morons, but one person said he was mostly critical of you, and he described you as, bringing me on, as your token Jew. Respond. Am I your token Jew?
I thought we were clear on that. I thought we had an understanding that you are, in fact, my token Jew. Was there a miscommunication here?
No, I did. We did agree that there'd be one token Jew. You have people in rotation. I'm your token Jew.
Well, no, it wasn't.
Mickey was here. He's your token Trump supporter.
Well, no, that's what happened. I like Mickey, my token Jew for these many years, demanded better working conditions. I said, Mickey, token Jews are a dime a dozen. Like, you do not have much bargaining power. And he said, oh, well, prove it. And he walks off in a huff. And then I signed you up. And Mickey, to his credit, people don't realize this about Mickey. When he's wrong, he will admit it. And when he saw you on the podcast, he said, you're right. Token Jews are a dime a dozen, And so, yeah.
Also, what really made me mad is the YouTuber described me as a woke professor. And that's a new one. That's a new one for me. I think it was because I was defending the speech of the Palestinian protesters. He was not a subtle thinker, but nonetheless achieved his goals. If he's watching now, he's delighted that his dumbass YouTube comment got me upset.
Yeah, you just gave the rat a pellet for pressing the bar, Paul. Big mistake.
Exactly.
I don't mean to demean this person.
No, good.
But
we've clearly chosen your sides. But anyway, back to So what do you think about sanctioning this person for harassing the woman?
Oh yeah, I'd get rid of him. You have to see the video. There's something a little wrong with this guy. That's my criterion for I guess firing professors. You think there's something a little wrong with him? But that's I have more to say.
Way too low a bar.
I have more to say about Bari Weiss. First of all, I want to correct myself a little. So last time we talked about the Yale student who said she had been stabbed in the eye because she was a Jew. And that became both the beginning and the end of a Bret Stephens column. And I kind of made a little fun of him for that because you and I watched the video and we said the video doesn't seem to bear it out. Now, I got one thing wrong. I said she was actually kind of slightly slapped across the head with the stick that the Palestinian flag was on, not stabbed in the eye. But actually, no, that head is not the head of the person claiming to have been stabbed in the eye. Her head is not visible. But what is clear is that nobody was stabbed in the eye. There was no jabbing motion. You thought any contact was an accident. I wasn't so sure it wasn't provocative in the way that, in the way a big brother would do something to a little brother. So the little brother would say to the mother, he did this. And they say, no, I didn't. It was just waving my flag stick. But anyway, there was no stabbing. There was no stabbing in the eye by any stretch of the imagination. What I realized is the origin, and a lot of people probably know this, the origin of that whole thing is an article in Bari Weiss's Free Press by this woman right after the alleged incident. It says, the opening line is like, last night I was stabbed in the eye at Yale University because I'm a Jew. So this was and the headline was originally that, except I think later they took off the because I was a Jew thing from the headline. But so the Bari Weiss thing starts this whole thing. And I saw a video montage of all the places this was, or many of the places this was uncritically repeated, like Fox News and on and on. It got a stunning amount of airplay. And, you know, it's kind of disturbing. There was a time when, like, they would have been shamed for this. The Free Press would have been shamed for this. Bari Weiss would have been shamed for this. They would have done a correction or something when they saw the video. You know what they did? They actually put the video in the article, like without comment, way down. I think just so they could say, "Oh yeah, we know there's a video that doesn't bear this out. We're just whatever." But in any event, I used to I was initially optimistic that the internet was going to make journalists more honest, and it seemed to for a while, because like New York Times columnists who used to be able to say more or less anything suddenly had commenters, and it really did make them more careful for a while. But I think social media so magnified the value of lying, the value of false information, that it just outweighs whatever, almost any reputational damage. God knows how many page views the Free Press got for this, and got the brand out, and you know, and then there's the related tribalization of America. It's like,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter to their business model what people like me who aren't in Bari Weiss's tribe are saying. That doesn't matter. And the other people, the truth will probably never catch up with them. And besides, given cognitive biases, if they have a brush with the truth about this, you know, it won't faze them. I mean, in fact, it's funny, like this woman who said she was stabbed in the eye, she was like on TV, like with not so much as a minor bruise anywhere in her head, saying I was stabbed in the eye. And like, apparently Fox News audience is like, "Oh my God, can I send money to help your recovery or something?" Even though there's obviously nothing wrong with it. Anyway, it's
No, I think some of what you're talking about has a specific cause, and it's Elon Musk and Twitter. Because Twitter's been changed in certain ways now. Twitter's been changed in certain ways that causes the problem you're describing to become worse. So one thing is now monetized, where you get money if enough people come to your, as if there wasn't enough incentive to publish stuff that will incense and engage people. Now you can really kind of earn kind of a living if you get 1 million people coming and liking your post. Video is now privileged over other sources, and so it just, and I think, you know, referring to news sites, for instance, I don't know whether you could still link to Substack sites, is now disincentivized. So it just makes everything worse. Like there was something which I think you had mentioned earlier. There was I saw a video of an attack on a site at UCLA by a very anti-demonstration crowd, and they were like throwing firecrackers into the tents and everything, which looks like an extremely violent attack. And I'm sure it was. The video clip, you know, maybe it wasn't representative, it was very powerful. But then there's context, and then I heard more, and then there's a story that maybe you know more about this than I do, that this was Persian Jews in the community, not students primarily, responding to news that a Jewish woman was attacked by the demonstrators and beaten unconscious, and this was a retaliation. Doesn't excuse it, but puts it in context.
No, I mean, I would, and I should actually mention, I had said in the Friday podcast that the video I had seen showed that overwhelmingly these were like pro-Israel people who started the violence, and it wasn't just firecrackers; it was throwing large objects against demonstrators, and in one case beating them and so on. And I had said, you know, this story has kind of appeared here and there in mainstream media, but they seem to be avoiding, you know, because this was the most alarming incident so far, I think, because what you don't want above all, whether it's red versus blue or whatever, is the two tribes starting to have big clashes and those spreading by contagion to other areas. And I thought, you know, the journalists haven't really gotten to the bottom of this. To its credit, the New York Times finally did do like an exhaustive video thing saying clearly, I don't know about exhaustive, but yes, this was like the pro-Israel forces started this. I think you're right. They were like diaspora Israeli Jews or something. But I will say it went on and on, because there's daytime footage and then there's nighttime footage when the real trouble started. And in both of those, it looks like the pro-Palestinian demonstrators are the victims. But I had not heard And this is a classic thing for a rumor like this, which may be true, who knows? This is the classic starter of, like, you know, interethnic violence and intertribal violence, generally, and it's often something that's done to a woman. That is like the most incendiary, and like the men come out to protect their women. So yeah.
But are you? So I could be wrong. I could just be wrong about this. I saw this on X, but I didn't confirm it in some way. There's two ways I could just be wrong about what provoked their attack, or I'm right about what provoked their attack, but it's not true. It's they were provoked by some sort of rumor or something like that. Which are you saying?
Well, I will just say there seems to have been a wave of provocation by a pro-Israel group during the day. And I think on that video, you can hear that some of them have actually, they have accents. Now, maybe they were Persian, maybe they're Israeli, but they don't sound like they grew up in America. And they are wearing, some of them are wearing, you know, pro-Israel stuff.
Yeah.
There's that. And then there is the nighttime stuff, which is very similar. That's when they're not just dismantling the barricade, but throwing parts of it at protesters, sending fireworks into the encampment. And then there's a case where a Palestinian guy, much more, or a pro-Palestinian guy, much more courageous than me, comes out and says, you know, like, don't do this. And he's just standing by the barricade, and he's assaulted by a series of guys. Like, they'll come hit him and then run away, hit him, run away. That's the video I've seen. And so I'm just saying it was not just a single moment of rage, because there's daytime and nighttime. But the media kind of finally got around to being, at least the New York Times, pretty clear about it. So good.
So the only adjacent comment is the anti-Semitism bill. And I've heard you talk about it and read what you had to write about it. And I kind of agree. It's you know, given my own principles, it's to penalize people for saying things like analogizing Israeli behavior to the Holocaust. Apparently, one of the things that a university can be punished for is allowing students to say that Jews have a greater loyalty to their ethnic group than to America,
or to Israel than to America, right?
Yeah, which strikes me kind of as an empirical question. I bet some do. I bet there's some Irish people in the States who care more about Ireland than about the States. Should it be punishable to say so?
Well, yeah,
I'm aware it's an anti-Semitic trope,
right?
But, you know, like, hey,
but should it be considered? I mean, it's two questions. Should you be condemned for saying it? You know, should you be stigmatized as a matter of norm enforcement? I mean, there are things that are racist or anti-Semitic that we do that with, and I think we should. There's that. But this bill, it raises a whole nother level of questions, because the way it works is you know, it's about Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which holds universities responsible for not permitting discrimination on their campuses. And that includes harassment. And this bill, and Jews were not originally construed as protected because it doesn't protect religious groups. It does national groups and ethnic groups. Jewish identity is this complicated thing that doesn't fit easily into any one bucket. But anyway, now I think it is taken to protect Jews. And what this law does is spell out what constitutes harassment of Jews. And it embraces this particular definition of anti-Semitism from the, what is it, International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance or something like that, which lists these examples of anti-Semitism. And the legislation specifically says you know, you should consider the examples as well. So the Department of Education, in enforcing this, you know, in if necessary, denying funding to universities who fail to prevent the harassment, should consider these examples. And they do include things like comparing the policies of Israel to Nazi Germany. So, as I pointed out in this piece I wrote about it in the Non-Zero newsletter, that means that what all of these students are doing now, saying that Israel commits genocide, is something that under this legislation, universities could have their funding cut off for. until they stomp that out, until they like expel all these students. And it's like, I don't use the word genocide for what's going on, but I'm very restrictive in my use of the word generally, but it's not crazy. It's not like anti-Semitism is the only explanation for applying it to a situation like this. And in fact, it has come to be this loosely applied to a lot of things. So yeah, that's that. And you're saying Bari Weiss is again, as I've always said, how many times have I said, God bless Bari Weiss? I'm just going to say it again. I know it's getting monotonous, but God bless Bari Weiss.
As you cycle through token Jews, just a word to the wise.
Hey, I could get you think she'd be, Paul, I just had this thought. You think she'd be interested in filling this position? Should you ever decide, God forbid,
or you decide
that you don't want to work with me?
Yeah. I think she's next. I think you need a female token Jew.
A little diversity wouldn't hurt.
Yeah. There's somebody, not a friend, but somebody I kind of like on Twitter, ended up at one point somewhat intemperately saying, boy, Jews have a lot of power in academia, something like that on a tweet. As you could imagine, she immediately withdrew the tweet. Somebody screenshotted it. Somebody who I think is significant bad faith posted it as an attack on her. She apologized at length. And I don't know. I don't know. What do you think? On the one hand, Jews have too much power in America, in Hollywood, have a lot of power, disproportionate power in America, in Hollywood, in academia. It is kind of an anti-Semitic trope. It's the kind of thing that people who don't like Jews are prone to say. On the other hand, it's not as if all human groups are equally represented in some perfectly random way in power. It's not. It's the Jews, relative to their population, I think honestly do have more power, say, in academia than the Anglicans or the Buddhists or the Christians in general. So have I just said something that I should be apologizing for? It doesn't seem that way. I mean, as a token Jew, I get away with all sorts of shit. But what about you? Would you say Jews have a lot of power in academia?
Well, in academia, it's kind of funny because so many of them are like left wing and would not be wielding it on behalf of pro-Israel colleges, especially in the liberal arts. I mean, on behalf of pro-Israel causes.
But just in general.
Yeah. Well, look, a better example of this question, if you want to crystallize it, is, Penn's president is hauled before Congress and takes kind of your line on free speech.
Yeah.
And says, whatever you think of from the river to the sea. In fact, she goes further. I'm sure she said, I find it abhorrent, but whatever, free speech. And a pro-Israel donor who I think was poised to give $100 million or something says, I'm going to cut off the money if you guys don't shape up. And they fire her or she steps down. Something a little similar happened at Harvard. Now, Bill Ackman had also been an advocate. He also been like a strong anti-woke guy very prominently and had been crusading on that front. But pro-Israel billionaire starts making noise. They fire their president, although if she hadn't been found to commit plagiarism, I think she would have weathered the storm. But, there's two questions. Should you be able to say, look, this was the pro-Israel forces at work, intimidating, exerting leverage in these two cases, possibly intimidating other university presidents to a point where they are being pretty forceful in the way they crack down on these things, arguably. And even if you say, broadly construed, if you define the Israel lobby broadly in the Walt Mearsheimer sense as not a centralized conspiracy, but a loose, sometimes even not connected, sometimes networked, a bunch of groups and so on, including affluent donors, then you could say this was the Israel lobby at work. So these are various ways you could characterize this. And the question is, are they anti-Semitic? And then I'm going to get to a question that I have a very strong view on about this. But first of all, I think you should be able to point to lobbying by any group that does lobbying, certainly including just AIPAC, which is an actual lobby, and And note that it has influence if you think it has influence. But
I think there's a difference, though, between saying pro-Israel groups have an enormous amount of sway on university issues, which I think is true, and nothing, not particularly sinister, even though pro-Israel groups tend to be Jewish, versus saying that Jews do. And that's the sort of, it's the second claim that gets incensed.
Absolutely. Well, this is the conflation. I mean, this is the irony of that definition of anti-Semitism, conflating Israel and the Jews by saying it's anti-Semitic to say certain things about the Israeli government. Yeah. I think that's crazy. And the funny thing is that this very conflation of Israel and the Jews, or with pro-Israel and Jews, is an actual anti-Semitic thing that people say, and that people do. I absolutely agree with that. But here's the thing that I think is truly crazy is that if you say this, which I think is true, if you say, look, for these pro-Israel donors, and we should say that, you know, as in the broad definition of the Israel lobby, it isn't just that it doesn't include all Jews. It includes a lot of evangelical Christians. Okay.
Yeah.
We should say that. But if you say, look, I worry that when, you know, Jewish pro-Israel billionaires weigh in and seem to get a university president fired, exert power in such a raw fashion, that will actually feed anti-Semitism. I personally think that's true. But the interesting, you know, because it's obviously like if you imagine these like anti-Semitic like chat groups or whatever, wherever they are, 4chan or wherever, you know, they're loving this, right? This is like recruiting material for them. I mean, it's I look at it exactly the way I view recruitment, you know, for terrorism, for Islamist terrorism. It's like, don't give them the raw material. Don't give them the PR material. But what really drives me crazy is that if you say this, some people say that's anti-Semitic. Have you heard this? Like, if you say that these things that these Jewish pro-Israel donors did could feed anti-Semitism, to say that is anti-Semitic. You've heard things like this, right?
I have.
Yeah. And I'm sorry.
That's maybe what you're saying now, which is to say that is anti-Semitic, may itself be anti-Semitic.
To observe that saying this is itself said to be an anti-Semitic trope is itself anti-Semitic. Now that I agree with. That I agree with. if you go high enough up the chain,
I think level.
Yeah, you got me. Yeah.
Okay. Let's shift, but not too much.
Maybe we should shift a lot. I think we're
this is you were telling me, and I saw a little bit about this, that Ayaan Hirsi Ali had some sort of back and forth with Richard Dawkins about something, and you had feelings about it.
Well, she converted to Christianity, and she had been one of the new atheists. She's, of course, this. Where is she from? She's a former Muslim from somewhere in Africa who I think...
I'm thinking Somalia, but I might be wrong.
Yeah, so I think she grew up with a particularly oppressive form of Islam that was oppressive of women in very harsh ways. And she... by the way, is she married to that guy? You know that guy?
Niall Ferguson.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And she's from Somalia.
She's from Somalia. That's what I thought. And she was identified as a new atheist. Religion is bad. And she's converted to Christianity. And I guess the guy who does the unheard thing had her and Dawkins together. And that's what kind of did the publicity, created the publicity recently. Like this week. And I was just, it's funny. Like she says, she now regrets that she was a new atheist. But then she says, I'm guilty. I do regret doing that, meaning being a new atheist. She says, I'm guilty of having said all faiths, all perceptions of God are the same and are equally damaging. So I've come to regret the damage I've done. So in other words, Islam is still bad. And I just want to say that was the founding doctrine implicitly of the New Atheists. I'm sorry, this happened right after 9/11. Sam Harris's book, The End of Faith, came out. If you look at the very first passage in the book, I haven't looked at it in years, but it's something to the effect of, if I tell you that somebody's on a bus and they have a suicide bomb strapped to them, you don't have to guess which religion they are. So from the beginning, they were saying there's, now it is, I'm sure, Sam's belief that religion generally is bad, but it was aimed at a view that a particular problem like 9/11, terrorism and so on was a function of religious belief and this in this particular religion. So this is, she's still in some ways, although a Christian, a new atheist, ironically, I would say, because that was, I think that was always the essence of the cause. Although they went on to, I debated Sam in LA and it was like his crowd. It was some like new atheist convention. And I mean, he was a rock star. He comes out on stage and there are women shrieking, literally. And
I know what that's like.
Yeah, isn't that, I mean, it gets tiresome. That's why I quit doing live events. But one thing I found in talking to some of the people in the crowd afterwards is actually a lot of them were from conservative Christian families and had felt depressed by that. So the anti-Christian thing was kind of part of the calling card. But anyway.
So I'm an old atheist, like this before, and it seems that there's two ways to be an atheist, and they're both be part of the movement. One is, and some people, many people like Harris and Dawkins do both. One is to attack the fact basis, to say, look, this idea of an immaterial, omniscient God that answers our prayers and created the universe, and the idea miracles and the rejection of evolution is all nonsense. It's just factual nonsense, and we should be done with it. And somebody that takes religion very seriously. It says, you people at some level, you believe these things and they're just foolish and you should reject them. And you can say that nicely or you can say it more harshly. And that applies to all of the religions in the world, just about. Then there's the second thing, which is what you're saying, which certainly Ali's work connects to this, which is to say, putting aside the fact that it's wrong or just ignoring the question, it's been a horrible influence on human affairs. It makes life worse. It is a force for repression and cruelty. This is Hitchens' argument largely, and so on. When you make that argument, it becomes, you could say this is true more of some faiths than others. And I don't think there's anything particularly sinister about that. You might, one way to put it, which is to say, let's not talk about religions at all as sort of monolithic entities, but more talk about as clusters of beliefs and ideas and practices. Certainly we point out some to criticize. So practices involving charity, for instance, which all the major religions have, are kind of nice. You say this is an enlightened morality at work. Practices involving the subjugation of women or other ethnic groups or whatever are terrible. And then religions differ to the extent they have that. So I don't think there's anything particularly hypocritical or sinister for somebody like Ali to say, I come from Islam and I reject its cultural practices. And I don't have anything to say about Judaism or Christianity or whatever.
Sure, but she's saying a little more than that. She's saying, Islam on balance is worse than Christianity. And she's free to say that and defend it. I mean, my problem, it's not the different, there are not differences of content in the different religions. It's that the practical expression of the content is extremely responsive to circumstance, I would say. And my book, The Evolution of God, tries to show that over millennia. And, that, I mean, the argument is, well, it looks specifically at belligerence, like how belligerently does one group feel toward another, another religious group. And I argue that it has to do with whether they perceive themselves as being in a zero-sum relationship, non-zero-sum, and it changes over time. I mean, in fact,
when I lecture on religion, I talk about your view. I could almost quote you from memory. something to say that the scriptures are religious texts are always complicated, and when groups are in a sort of case of a zero-sum conflict, they'll reach into the text and find the parts that encourage hatred and animosity and use those. When they are in cases of cooperative interactions, they'll reach into text and find other things.
Right. Like in the 19th century, I suspect, I don't know, the average Jew would have been better off at parts of that living under Islamic rule than in Europe. You know, under Islamic rule, it's like Christians, Jews, fine. You have to pay a higher tax, which is obviously not something I support. But you live in peace; it's just no big deal at all. Now, I mean, there have been other times when there was forcible conversion, but I mean, there have been long periods of time. I mean, for God's sake, the original Hamas charter says Christians and Jews can live peacefully under Islamic rule. We'd have to wait and see how that played out. But so, things change according to circumstance. And then there was a contest over land, of course, between Zionist Jews and Arab Christians and Muslims, but they were predominantly Muslim. And that certainly had an impact on things, because that's a classically zero-sum thing, a contest over land. And did I say this to you? Quote Richard Dawkins recently in some podcast I did, saying, I think I did. If it weren't for religion, there would be no Israel-Palestine conflict. I thought I was totally missing the point.
Yeah.
But the point I'm making now is the contest over land then exacerbates the religious tension and draws out the parts of a religion's doctrine that justify hostility. You see that on both sides, but certainly Hamas is one example of it. Yeah. And so that's the argument. And I just thought Dawkins and Harris, like, the implications of their view for foreign policy are like 100% wrong. They think that, like, if we could just extinguish religious belief, there'd be peace in the world. And I'm like, no, I don't think grabbing Muslims, shaking them by the shoulders and saying, don't you understand that your God doesn't exist is really the ticket. I think it's facts on the ground.
So let me channel my inner Dawkins and Harris, and I'll put this in a way which I actually believe. So, people captured the demonstrators saying foolish things, and one of the things that got captured was somebody who was talking about rights for gay people and saying gay people have it so much better in Palestine than in the United States. This isn't a direct quote, but this was, and she was quite ridiculed for this, and rightfully so, because gay people have it much better in a country like the United States than in Gaza, where there's often murders of gay people. There's a lot of the countries in the area have extremely repressive laws against homosexuality, and Israel does not. Israel is quite permissive, and I would say that the way the United States and Israel does it is better, and I think you'd agree with that. And I don't think that that's entirely unrelated to the use. I'll put it this way: the use to which people put religious doctrines.
No, it's not. But I'm a little older than you, and I'm here to tell you, I grew up in a Christian country where the situation for gays was really not very different from what it is in Palestine, which is you better stay quiet about it or somebody will beat you up. Okay? And so it's hard for me to attribute that. And in fact, they can cite biblical scripture if they want to. It's there. It's there, and it's probably there in Islamic scripture. And the question is whether they want to cite it. And in my lifetime, we've seen some kind of change in conditions that was transformative. And I know Muslims who are fine with gay people. So it must be possible for it to work in that religion too.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would disagree with some sort of essentializing view that maybe the people who are criticizing would have, that a Muslim society inevitably, inherently, is worse for gay people. And no, I could easily imagine the world transforming so that certainly Christian societies could be savage towards gay people and Muslim societies could be positive. But it isn't the way it is now.
Oh, on average, no, it's not. And also it's you know, in Putin's Russia, increasingly it's not an Orthodox Christian country. And it's interesting to compare Iran and Russia. I think in both cases, if we had avoided conflict and sought engagement, and there were many opportunities in both cases, I think, wouldn't have been trivially easy, but more and more commercial engagement, go out of our way not to seem like an actual enemy that is a threat to their soil. I think gays would be better off in both cases. I have very little doubt about that.
So this is a chain here where you're in some way blaming the cruelty towards gays and Putin, Russia, to U.S. foreign policy.
I avoid the word blame, but I am
causally connected.
They are causally connected. Yes.
I don't know.
And of course, they're causally connected to Putin. I'm not trying to remove blame from his shoulders and the leadership of Iran. But those are good examples of exactly what I'm talking about. It's about the facts on the ground. If you take what is already a somewhat culturally conservative regime and make your cosmopolitan liberal country seem like the enemy, they're probably going to double down. And you've got an Orthodox Christian country, you've got an Islamic country. They both do it.
Well, you know, everything has some causal effect on everything else. In some way, this way of seeing it taken to the extreme sort of denies an autonomy and losing the word here, but
agency.
Agency.
I hate that word. I hate the word.
But
this is like
you wouldn't turn it around and say, yeah, the reason why the U.S. has, you know, fairly liberal and cosmopolitan laws about gay people is because of the policies of Russia and Arab countries in the Middle East.
Wait, I wouldn't say what's the first part?
You wouldn't invert it. You wouldn't invert it. So the way you're framing it is
no, because I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, I think countries, societies often seek out their equilibrium for external forces, sure, but also for internal reasons, including reasons of faith that they have. I feel you're pushing to a view which is too extreme on one side, but somebody's said this to you before, which is that religion, you're right, religions adopt according to the facts on the ground. And you can't deny that because historically, Christianity in the US is very different now than it was 100 years ago. And Islam different from 100 years ago. But at the same time, these religions do have precepts, ideas. You know, to deny that would also be to deny anything positive that they possess.
Yeah, no, they do. There is the causality kind of works both ways, although I just think because New Atheists and others underestimate the force of the causal arrow that goes from like facts on the ground to religious doctrine, you know, that influences how people read their scriptures, what parts they'll focus on.
Yeah.
We need to correct that imbalance. And I think American policy reflects a misunderstanding of the way things work. And not just the way religious expression changes over time, at least the political part of religious expression, but in general, the culture and politics change. But, you know, I'm going to give you a chance for your devastating riposte, but we've reached a point, probably long past it, where we should go into overtime, which is available to paid subscribers of the Non-Zero newsletter and the Small Potatoes newsletter.
Yes,
make sure you pick the right Small Potatoes newsletter, folks. Oh, sorry, Paul. I don't want to get into that. Pick Paul Bloom's Small Potatoes newsletter. Either way, get access to what is likely to be a finish the sentence for me. Say something like promotionally valuable. It's likely to be like super great.
Bring in the money. Really help me.
Yeah, that'll do it. That'll do it. Which is likely to make me and Paul rich. That'll do it.
That's right.
Because they share our goal. No, we're gonna we'll talk about this a little more in there. And there's more stuff I want to talk about.
Okay, we got more stuff. I'm gonna psychoanalyze you a little bit In the
Oh, yeah.
last paid section, you express a somewhat resentment about being characterized as only a journalist, which is why in my introduction I was very careful to avoid that. Well, I would have been careful anyway.
That
but
was
I wanted to
paywalled content. We
I
shouldn't
wanted
give
to-
that away for free even. We
I
shouldn't
want to
tell them
dive,
what we just.
I want to
Go
dive
ahead.
deep into that. You had more three body problem thoughts.
And you wrote a piece on clinical psychology
I
that
did.
is, I guess, what gives you the credentials to psychoanalyze me about my whole like identity resentment thing.
Many people don't know this, but if you publish enough Substack pieces on clinical psychology, you kind of become a therapist. And in
Yeah.
many states, you're licensed to practice.
You would be a good therapist, actually.
Thank you.
I might not.
I think
I
I'm
might
too
not.
empathic. I just
No,
get
no,
too
that's
caught up in
good.
another person's pain.
The irony is, although I'm coming off as like this softy squish liberal on foreign policy, I'm the one who, if I were a therapist, would say, shape the fuck up. And you
I
would
could
be
see- I
like,
could see
tell
that
me
in you.
about your feelings. You know?
I get you fall shy into unconditional love.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I sometimes think this is a complaint I have had, that many of the people I know who are kind of a little bit like you do mindfulness meditation, take meditation very seriously.
They need it.
Exactly. And you think that's an argument meditation is wrong, but God knows what you'd be like if you didn't practice meditation.
I've been there and it's not pretty, Paul.
No.
So do that. Become a paid subscriber or member, as we say. And by the way, you can become a paid subscriber to both if you want to make both of us rich, which is good cause.
We should talk about some sort of, your Substack
Rev share?
is much more subscribers than me. So, and in
Oh,
some way.
whoa. Are we going to play the pity card here, Paul? We playing the pity card?
Yes.
We should bring down the paywall. We should. I handle production. I may bring it down before you said that.
We're gonna get real. We're gonna get real here. So
okay.
Yeah, let's bring
okay, we're about to get real, folks. We're heading into overtime. Thanks for listening or watching. Smash the like button, rate and review, and so on.